Hand over to each one of you. Maybe you can introduce yourself.
So, hoping this is working. My name is Ceri Jamieson. So I am currently a regulatory compliance team lead with a company called Deriv, which is one of the world's largest online trading brokerages for, can you guess it? Derivatives. My previous employments include SEMA as a chief analyst in the on-site inspections unit for a couple of years, and then a rather long time with Ernst & Young in London and in Cayman, working in the audit department. So very excited to be here tonight.
Hi, my name is Sandra Castelo. Also an audit background, but with PwC, so competition. Since then, worked in industry for the last 6 years in the crypto and blockchain industry. More recently, in the last 2 years, with the Avalanche Foundation. So it's the foundation that links us to the Avalanche blockchain ecosystem. That's me.
My name is Amy Hubble. I'm the principal at Radix Financial. We have operations in both the United States and here in Cayman. I am American originally, and so please forgive me for that. Just try to hold it in for the next hour. But yes, I focus mainly on private wealth and investment management. We do have a private fund, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Nice, thank you. So I'm sure you all have read the title, which is why you're here tonight, and it's being very future-focused and talking about the evolving financial sector of Cayman. And when I read that, I was like, I'm sure recently Trump signed an executive order, right, to promote and support the use of digital assets and blockchain and all those fancy words. So maybe, Amy, you can talk to the ripple effect that you foresee this is going to have on Cayman.
I knew that Trump would be mentioned quickly. So yes, that is an executive order that was signed, but Trump has also signed about 75 executive orders in the just a little over a month that he's been president. And in addition to that, he has now 70 legal challenges against those executive orders. So what the practice now becomes for practitioners, for investment managers, is really trying to see what the difference in something that's real and something that is rhetoric. And
like it mean quite.
That he did not do him any favors, right? But from my perspective, and when we talk about that particular executive order, I still think that the United States is a long way from having what we have here in terms of digital asset regulation. I mean, we're still trying to figure out who would even regulate them in terms of which agency. Is it going to be the SEC as the security? Is it going to be the CTFC as a commodity? Is it going to be a treasury function as a currency? Or is it going to be a new regulatory body? And I don't know. I'm not in the digital asset space myself, and I'm not in the regulatory space beyond what I need for my own business. But, from my perspective as somebody that lives in Cayman, I do think that all of this is a benefit to Cayman, because the length of time that it's going to take the United States to get this figured out, we already have figured out. One, we already have a virtual asset service provider and a licensing regime in place today. We only have one financial regulator, and we do not have the monkey on our back of also trying to figure out taxation. And even just looking around this room, we already have an upskilled labor force of service providers that can service that space. So even further delay, even though I do think that the United States is going to be coming for it, it's going to take some time to work its way through the system. And in the meantime, Cayman's just going to get further and further ahead.
That's great news, in fact. Sandra, maybe you can talk to how you foresee blockchain being integrated into the Cayman financial system, moving away from the traditional financial systems into this. What's your take on that?
It's a natural transition, because a lot of what is already here in the traditional finance, it's an easy move to digital finance or DeFi. And in terms of going back to your point on Trump and the impact that it's had, on my side, I can already tell, because as a foundation, our role is to incentivize ecosystem participants, people that want to build on the blockchain, in particular our blockchain. And I can tell that there's a lot of projects that were kind of on the shelf, or they were thinking about it, or they were figuring out where they wanted, and all of a sudden that's now back up on and live, and they want to move things forward, and everybody seems to be in a rush to be the next ones. Especially when you add the AI factor to it, which is like the other hot topic. Everybody,
you get another point for the second buzzword of AI.
So the combination of AI being this hot topic and the positive outlook of blockchain, especially from the US, because everybody's always afraid of, okay, well, we don't know, there's uncertainty. At the end of the day, most of the technology or the money still comes. There's other big centers, but there's still a lot that comes from the US, and they're often the leaders. So when things start to move, then everybody starts to move, and then becomes a race, and we can feel it. On my side, I can feel in terms of volume of projects that get pitched to us and people that want to do things and who wants to be financed. There's definitely been a change in the last, few weeks, months.
I think you'd even call it that AI is a very hot topic, and maybe Ceri, you can speak to AI, and it's obviously a close relative of the blockchain technology, but are we, meaning Cayman as a financial centre, really shaping ourselves, our workforce, our financial centres for the future of AI?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say throughout the financial services sector, I'm seeing increased use and adoption and implementation of a whole bunch of AI technologies and applications. And that's not just kind of one thing, right? You've got your large language models, which are generally kind of text-based. They've currently absorbed all of the written material that we currently have. They're having to create their own to teach the large language models more. You have generative AI, which builds on that, but it can create brand new things. And that's not just text. That is your images. That's your audio. This is all of that. You have AI workflows that can streamline or automate repetitive processes. And you also have agentic AI, which I think is a lot more what people think when they go AI and these kind of robot overlords that everybody's terrified of, that can make decisions and can take actions autonomously without kind of human interaction. And I'm seeing a whole host of a bunch of those being implemented across the financial services sector. And what companies are now starting to do, it's not, okay, how can we use kind of currently publicly available models, but how can we gain a competitive advantage? And really, the only answer to that is to build in-house proprietary tools. And so that's actually where we're starting to see the industry moving towards. And that could take the form of ring fencing one of the current AI models that's publicly available, and then feeding it a whole bunch of your company data that you're not going to feed to a public model because you don't want all of your business plans and your proprietary information out there, and then leveraging those models to create other internal tools. So Deriv, we are licensed in a whole host of jurisdictions globally. We have clients all over the world. And at the moment, it seems like we are implementing a new AI model or application every single day. We have LLMs that are translating our marketing materials so that we can distribute that up to clients globally. We have AI workflows that are automatically doing our trading reconciliations to comply with EU regulations like EMIR and MiFIR, which took hours and hours of an entire team to perform that manually. We have created a prompt generation tool. So all of our employees can use AI models to complete their day-to-day tasks. Because as you would expect, if you put rubbish into it and you give it a rubbish prompt, you're not going to get anything useful out of it. So we have a prompt generation tool. Tell it what you need, and it's going to give you 3 or 4 different versions that the employees review for what they are looking to achieve, and that's what they can use. And we're now in the process, really excitingly, of actually creating our own agentic AIs. We're one of the first that we're looking to do to comb through all of the applicable regulations that apply to us globally. Are there any new updates? Are there any new regs that are coming up? Are there any guidance notes? And it's automatically combing through what applies to us, what doesn't, and flagging potential compliance issues before they become I think. And so absolutely, I think that the industry here, it's a work in progress, but we're 100% seeing move to adoption and implementation.
Good. I'm just thinking of, the AI transformation, and I think to myself, it's, I looked at it, I'm like, this is the future, right? Like, this is where we're moving towards. And I think if I'd asked my dad maybe a few years ago, what would you think the future is going to look like? He would definitely not have told me, it's going to be artificial intelligence, but yet here we are. So if I can maybe pose a question to you, what do you think the future of AI being the present now, is going to be?
Yeah, no, honestly, I think just further adoption and implementation. As I've said, the whole industry has started to implement, but there are definitely some individuals in some industries that are kind of holding out. They feel that AI has gone from 0 to 100 very quickly, not quite sure where to begin, and it's not unlike your traditional kind of change management. There are always going to be people that are fear of change. They fear how their jobs are going to be altered and adapt, and there can be fear that people are going to be out of work, right? If AI comes in and kind of takes over your job. Where I see us going in the future is any or the majority of tasks that can be automated probably are going to go. And so that does mean intrinsically there is going to be adjustments to people's job descriptions and kind of the way that we work. But this isn't new. I was speaking to one of my mentors a few weeks ago, and he was reminiscing when computers came into the office, right? He was like, no, you need to understand, Ceri, like this has happened before. He goes, and my secretary at the time was panicking that she would be completely out of a job because she wrote everything by hand, and I had to write all my notes really, really tidily so that she could, copy that over. And it's our generation just hasn't seen that kind of change yet, and so it seems a lot scarier than it actually is. And so that's absolutely where I think we're getting to. I think we're in a really exciting place right now where we need to focus on education. And even though the population of Cayman is so small, we're already starting to see courses cropping up, which is amazing. The UCCI, I saw, did a 2-day conference towards the end of last year about artificial intelligence and the future of it. We have Cayman Enterprise and UCCI have put together a digital skills certificate, which one of their courses is a beginner's course of artificial intelligence as well. And so I think we are absolutely on the right track, and it ultimately is going to be full adoption and implementation, but it's just kind of getting people comfortable with it and upskilling the current workforce and the new workforce that is going to be coming in kind of high school and college.
Yeah, that's where it all starts, I think. Just upskilling your current workforce, and everyone's going to come in, should understand it's going to happen, and they should be willing to adopt as well.
Yeah.
So if we look at the global financial sector, Amy, more about the US, maybe you can talk to what the expectations are for 2025. We're talking interest, forex, any Fed action, implications on Cayman.
Yeah, I mean, interest rates have got to be probably the absolutely most important data point to any investment decision that you're making within the context of the day. So especially whether or not you're dealing with the United States, whether or not you're dealing here in Cayman, we are importing all of the monetary policy that the Fed is making on our behalf. So whether or not you're getting paid in US dollars, getting paid in Cayman dollars, whether or not you're getting paid in Bitcoin that's tied to US dollars, you are certainly, everyone in this room who lives here, exposed to whatever those people at the Fed are doing on a month-to-month basis. So we follow it very, very closely. But it's from our perspective, and you guys would have heard the term soft landing a lot in the last year. That's another buzzword. We'll say tariff in a minute, I'm sure. But the term soft landing, we were at a high of interest rates last year. So the Fed funds rate was at a high of about 5.5. So what that means for Cayman Prime is 3%. So if the Fed funds rate is 5.5, Cayman Prime is 8.5, right? Since September, the Fed has reduced rates by a full point. So now the Fed funds rate is, for simplicity, at an upward target of 4.5%. Now Cayman Prime is at 7.5%. So now the next obvious question is,
how much farther are they going to come down? Are they going to come down anymore? Because that is what's going to determine people's kind of whether or not they're going to wait, whether or not they're going to refinance now. A lot of decisions are based on what they think investment rates are going to be doing in the future. So really, really important data point to find out. Now, to answer your question, again, don't know. The Fed doesn't know either. You can ask the actual members of the Fed who vote every quarter and tell us how far they're going to be coming down in the dot plot. Those people, as of December, think that the neutral rate, or like the lowest rate that they would come down, where growth can continue, unemployment is not affected, but inflation is not growing, is probably around 3%. So that's still another 1.5 from here. If you look at the markets and swap markets, they're predicting it quite a bit more higher. They are probably saying it between 3.5% and 4%, but that number's changing all the time because the neutral rate, or again, finding that perfect, it's just a metaphor of where they're landing on the tarmac, is a completely changing situation. Right now, they're just circling the airspace. They're kind of said to the market, and this Fed is very communicative in terms of what they're thinking, what their plans are, and they're kind of in a holding pattern as they wait for a little bit more data. Now, obviously, there is some chaos happening on the fiscal side of the US, as you guys have obviously heard on the news, and the Fed is technically a non-political, non-biased party, but that doesn't mean that anything that happens on the fiscal side doesn't affect ultimately what they have to do. So if they have these threaded tariffs come through, and I don't know if they are. I don't know if it's a threat. I don't know if it's real. Obviously, the market has stopped caring at this point. He tries to start a war with Canada and Mexico every other day, even this week, I think. But the only tariff that's actually gone into effect as of today is an additional 10% on China. But again, the threat level changes every single day in terms of what's going to happen. Tariffs in general, we would assume to be inflationary. We understand this, I think, living from Cayman, in that everything we import has a duty on it that obviously comes down to us. Things that we buy here are more expensive. So we understand that intrinsically to know that if you add an additional tariff from places that you're buying from, things are going to be more expensive. Now, the last couple inflation readings have certainly been heightened at about 3% year over year. January in general is usually the highest reading for inflation because, I mean, you even think about your own businesses, you kind of adjust prices in January a lot anyway. So it's kind of hard to read that just as a January number. But all that being said, it is going to affect capital flows. And when it comes to Cayman, where capital flows are coming from. And at least through last week, the S&P 500 hit a new all-time high. It's since tripped a little bit the last few days. But, I don't think we're at a restrictive level quite yet in terms of seeing interest rates having some sort of red light flashing that they're via recession, that we're in trouble, that would ultimately rush along that kind of lowering of the rates possible, which is all good, especially for new assets like the digital asset space and even private assets. The darling of private assets right now is certainly private credit. There's a lot more, retailization getting opened up to getting access to private credit, a lot more access to private equity from the advisor space, from the retail space. So that's all more money coming into funds that are generally, affected to Cayman. But I do think the continued, I hate to say U.S. exceptionalism, because that's not what I mean in terms of, but as the U.S. continues to grow and AI innovation continues and spending continues, I do think it is ultimately good for Cayman, who, again, is so closely tied to the United States.
Thanks.
What was the question?
I think you answered it spot on. Sandra, maybe you can talk to how you're seeing this in practice, being a financial controller at a blockchain foundation.
Well, for us, all the traditional finance is barely applicable, and anything that creates chaos and risk becomes negative for the crypto side. So initially, Trump being pro-crypto and all that, everybody got excited. Everything went up, It didn't matter what project you could have had the Trump token in particular. You could have issued any token, and you would have made money in, between November and early January. But then things become unpredictable, and the second things get risky, the first asset class that gets hit is crypto, and everything has gone down. And pretty much at this point, I was saying earlier, people are excited, okay, like the regulatory environment might be potentially better and there's momentum, but the fact that the prices have gone down because of all the risk and nobody knows where it's going to go, that has somewhat stopped certain things and creates uncertainty, and all of a sudden, whoever's not solidly into the blockchain world, doesn't really, hasn't drank the Kool-Aid, can easily kind of go, oh, you know what? It looked good, but now let's just watch and see what happens. So the people that are in it, they've seen it before, like, okay, yes, we just have to wait. It's just whatever psychotic episodes that stock market goes through, crypto has its, with more height. So if you bought into it, you're like, we just have to wait. Let's develop technology. Let's be excited about these other tools, sprinkling some AI. But otherwise, like in terms of if you're just trading it on your little account on whatever, you're not loving the impact of all this uncertainty on the price of tokens. Unless you're shorting, I guess that's one.
It's kind of hard to predict, I guess.
It's impossible to predict. If you think you can predict, then obviously you know nothing, right?
You sound exactly like my dad. He's always just like, invest, don't sell. Just keep it there. And that's exactly it, because you never know what it's going to do, right? And it should come back at some point, I think. The crypto market's going to just continue growing.
I obviously believe in the technology, but at the same time, crypto is in that phase, like the early, internet phase, where, early on, if you had to bet, you went like AOL, Yahoo, all the way. Obviously, that didn't pan out, but it doesn't mean that the technology didn't pan out. So at the moment, there's, thousands of projects. Obviously, the vast majority of those projects won't survive. And other than Bitcoin having found its niche and, it knows what it's doing, everybody has agreed on what that is. And that's why it's the one that has the least volatility. Everybody else is kind of like, throwing darts, hoping something sticks. And there's a lot of proof of concept, but there isn't like full integration. It's like half-assing it a little bit. Like even tokenization of funds, for example. We invest in some of those because we're trying to, encourage that technology to develop. But a lot of times, if whoever that fund worked with, if the lawyers were like a little, not fully convinced of the crypto thing and, they fight it, what they end up is a product that's in between, where it's like, okay, it's still your traditional fund, they just added a layer of tokenization on top. So it's not really tokenization, it's like, oh, now we have 2 layers. So it's like you just made it more expensive. But funds like BlackRock are really going for the tokenization, where like you invest in the fund, you get tokens. Those tokens, you can play around with them. So that's good news, and it's coming from well-established, actors in the space. So let's see.
That's good. If we zoom in a little bit more on specifically Cayman sector, maybe you can speak to. Obviously, the Cayman is a global financial leader in the financial space, right? And I think the same goes for transitioning from traditional finance into blockchain. How are you seeing this taking shape? Maybe, regulation-wise as well, because I think it's an entire different ballgame.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think Cayman has, for a long time, it's been kind of one of the gold standard financial jurisdictions of the world. Initially with like the funds industry, but more recently it has become kind of the gold standard for like blockchain and fintech as well. And I think there's 2 reasons for that. And I think the first one is we have, a fairly light touch regime. It's robust, but still light touch when compared to the States and things like that in the UK. But I think our biggest selling point is actually our human capital. And I think both Sandra and Amy have spoken about it today. We have a wealth of skill that has been built up over the last 5 or 6 years, especially in kind of fintech and blockchain. And it touches kind of all areas of these products. And that's from kind of inception all the way to, I mean, not necessarily getting to end of life at the minute if any of these things are still growing. But I think that's one of our huge selling points. And so I think that trend is just going to kind of continue with us remaining as kind of one of the primary jurisdictions. And that's, I don't see Aaron here today, but our VASP regime, again, we've now got the licensing in place, and that is shaping up to be a gold standard globally. We weren't at the forefront of the development of that. We had kind of Bermuda and the BVI that kind of went ahead and they put out the legislation first. But the legislation that we have in place is extremely robust, coupled with the human capital and the service providers that we have on island. I really think will continue to be. And we've noticed that ourselves, Deriv, we've only been on island for a couple of years. And there is a marked difference between the service providers we're buying on island versus in other jurisdictions, some of which I have already mentioned.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned CMI is the only regulator, right, on island. So, is this commission?
As far as I know.
Yeah. And so, they're just going to keep on regulating the traditional finance and the blockchain and just go with it? Are they, are we seeing any other stakeholders?
I actually met with them the other day, and they had a lot of questions around AI. They had a lot of questions around I don't think they have an understanding of it. I mean, and I don't either, but we don't. But I certainly think that there needs to be a skilling at the regulatory level too. As a small business owner, I do think that the jurisdiction is not, and having suffered through getting CBETs, I don't think that the jurisdiction is overly friendly towards small businesses in the financial services sector or emerging managers, unless, and obviously we're in CVC, so I have to say, if you have a partnership in CEC or Tech Cayman, I don't think that small business or that startup culture would even exist here without some of those partnerships to kind of bridge the gap. So I think that what I'm doing here and some of the other special zones has really been able to foster some of that industry that I don't think would have had the staff, the money, or just the regulatory burden is pretty high for a small business, I can attest to. So I think that's good. I think the new Cayman finance regime has done really well things for the reputation of the island, and loving to see more of that. And I think it's a good kind of very professional organization that's representing kind of our private entrance to the rest of the world, which I think is good. But yeah, I'd love to see more efficiency in the regulatory space, and maybe now that we're off those gray lists, they can we're phoning them now. But actually, going back to one thing you said, as a small business, again, these companies that are able to get these new scales by having in-house AI models built for themselves, you do start to think, can you compete against, and I don't want to ask an extra question, but can you compete in a world where you are going to be competing against larger companies that can put as much money as you can to build your own custom AI system?
Yeah, I think that's a tricky one. I think much like any traditional kind of system where you have a small player trying to enter into a saturated market, I think there's going to be challenges. They have, as you say, far less capital. But I think it is a case of being strategic about the AI that you are looking to implement. And so it's not a no for small businesses, but I think the focus needs to be on, yes, the only way that you could compete would be to implement some of these and make sure you're gaining the efficiencies. But it's looking, where are you getting the most bang for your buck, right? Going, okay, let's innovate everything, let's bring AI in, automate. It's not going to be financially feasible. And so it is going to be, okay, so the headcount needs to remain relatively low. So what are the most arduous and time-consuming tasks for these small companies? And seeing whether it might not be an in-house proprietary system, right? Not necessarily off the ground, but what is out there that you can use and you can leverage. Might not be perfect, but that's like a new fund admin setting up, right? And using Advent Geneva, right? Instead of building their own in-house software. There'll be challenges, but I don't think it's impossible. And then just actually on your point with the regulation and kind of the efficiencies there, I would love to see SEMA being given the latitude and the budget to implement its own tools as well. That was definitely one of the biggest challenges I had when I was working there. They've not been given the funding to develop these internal tools, and so they have relatively archaic systems. And honestly, SEMA are doing the very best they can with the resources and the tools that they have. But in order for them to, as a regulator, be best in class and leading the forefront here, they themselves also need to be given the opportunity to implement these, get rid of all of those really manual, repetitive processes so that they can focus and understand the technologies more. And then hopefully we'll have less of a black and white and slightly more commercial approach. But yeah.
I think we've given a fair amount of attention to the roadblocks and all the difficult things going into this. But on a more exciting and lighter note, what are the initiatives we're looking at, Amy, going forward?
Yeah, and I think I mentioned, I really do think that all of the innovation here and the capital and the support and even the kind of courses that are happening for young Caymanians to have. And I went to a business pitch meeting, giving young Caymanians a chance to even just present in front of people that do have capital and be willing to invest in good ideas. And so I love that culture is being fostered here. I really, really, really love to see it because I do think those are where ideas start from.
Yeah.
And I hope that can continue.
It's good. And Sandra, maybe over to you again. Again, being involved on the day-to-day, being registered in the zone, how has this helped you taking the swing to blockchain?
Well, one funny enough little personal note, I was in traditional finance and I was trying to find a better, work-life integration. And the funny thing is
balance.
Not integration. Balance is like utopia. And I thought if I could only work part-time, and I could, I can give a solid 4 hours a day, high quality, with all my experience. But who would hire me in Cayman for 4 hours if they have to pay a full work permit? And in the special economic zone, my work permit is $1,500, whether I work an hour or 15 hours a day. It doesn't matter. And so it was an opportunity for me to combine that personal desire to also, I initially had joined, I was actually already in the special economic zone with an investment management company. But then I first started working in crypto with a cryptocurrency mining company. And they were starting from scratch. The CFO was based in Canada at the time, had some crypto experience, but we were essentially learning as we were doing and doing just a whole bunch of reading and learning on, the school of the internet kind of thing. So you just learn by doing it, by reading. We were a public listed company, so we had to issue financial statements that had to be audited. I went from having to do a lot of learning myself to having to teach the auditors what it is that they were auditing. And as time went by, I also started, building my team. And I think in the last, for 6 years, I've hired 7 or 8 people in the finance department of the companies I've been in. So I'm teaching one person at a time and bringing more accountants to the crypto side, blockchain side, which for the most part, we're still counting things. The part that's interesting is that there's concepts or scenarios that just don't exist in traditional, business or life. All of a sudden you have these things that, technically it didn't cost anything. So what's our cost? And if we sent it back, did it change? Did I make a profit? Because when I sent it came back, then it changed price, but really nothing happened. I still have the same token back. There's all these scenarios that just are new, real life scenarios that there's no rules, regulations. You can search as much as you want. It's not really there. Even with the regulations, so my company is under IFRS, so it's still quite broad, and I can almost do whatever makes sense. The U.S. GAAP is now, a more specific standard, which is closer to what I believe makes sense, but they've made it very specific now. Okay, this token does, but if it's this, no, now it's this, and I think they went from no real regulation to now being maybe too specific on certain things, and it creates these weird scenarios depending on how you're using the token. It's the same token, but if you're using it this way now, oh no, you account for it now. What if I use this token and I then change how I'm using it? Then what happens? I think there's a lot of people who don't use the technology, don't use the tokens, that are making decisions as to what the regulation should be. Also, there's so many possible scenarios that I understand that it's difficult to come up with a standard that would applies to everything. And until there's enough use cases, until we figure out what we want to do with this, until everybody buys into it, I think it's going to be the path we have to maneuver. But to me, it's fun because it means I get to create my accounting standard. Yeah, you better write it. So.
Get to be creative accounting. Yeah. But so,
I don't think that's normally allowed.
so but really, are we talking IS3 inventories under IFRS? Are we talking IFRS 9 financial instruments? Where are we at?
Commodities. You have to take the broker-dealer exception, and you document the hell out of it, and then because
We're recording.
No, but it's all within, the funny thing is that there's certain, this could be interesting, I don't know, I don't think Cayman wants to get into this, but when I was researching early on to try and figure out, inventory makes no sense, and even intangible makes no sense. And when I was looking at, but who's coming up with which ideas, and funny enough, Hong Kong already had some guidance on, no, it should be commodities, fair value, then move on. And I was like, okay. And I thought that would take momentum, and that was, I'm talking about 6 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And it's still not quite, what people have come up to. So I really feel like it's just a question of bringing everybody on board. The more it's adopted, the more you have companies like, MicroStrategy, or Strategy now, but MicroStrategy, as they were named. They have so much Bitcoin on their balance sheet now, and they're probably something had to be done.
It pushes them to actually start.
So it's when you have the large players that are making a stance, and okay, well, now we have to decide whether it's A or B, So then as the small players, you hope that they make the right decisions, because whatever they decide then carries a lot of weight. And then no matter how creative I was, I'll have to fall in line. No, and when I say that, it's more that it didn't exist and I had to come up with the policies. But
only being ex-order. If it's not documented, it's not done. So you'll have watertight documentation now.
On file.
There we go.
Any last remarks from any of you?
Just on the topic of AI and crypto blockchain, one thing that's interesting, you would think, obviously, hand in hand, blockchain, it's already digital, let's just add digital robots. But the funny thing is that the number one issue in crypto still is security, and this week has showed us that there's still risks, and so from our front, I feel that in my little universe, using AI for things that are creative, for things that are a process, anything that's internal is great, but as an agent where they could touch anything of value, either a bank account, a wallet, there's no chance in hell that we would be putting AI touching those things, and it will take forever for that to happen. So as much as there's this, race to who's gonna add AI to a blockchain so you can do everything, it works in small scale. The second you have, the risk is so high that it could just empty your wallet, and then what? So it's this paradox. It's been interesting.
So maybe let's hear from the audience. Do you have any? There we go.
Basically, politics over dinner with peers. So you shouldn't talk about politics over dinner that we're all drinking, so that's why. We're coming up to elections here. There are lots of different parties running. There's sure to be memorandums and all sorts of things coming out, and issue setting and lots of discussions around that. but in this space, particularly in this zone where we're all innovating, and as you said, like there's not maybe enough focus on like sort of startup and support like emerging managers and all of this, like if the next government could be mindful of certain points in terms of like where they invested capital and the sort of policy points that they were to set and sort of went themselves to over the next 5 to 10 years in this space. Open to anybody on the panel who gives that question. What would it be from your perspective?
Making sure the internet connection is solid. Yeah, I do think that that's a really big risk, is power for us. And, you know, even when you talk about kind of making up the rules, you know, for investment managers, you know, to have return, you have to have risk. But at the same time, you also have to rely that those securities that are licensed or those securities that are licensed have a regulator that is knowing what they're doing when they're looking at it. And that when you're looking at their financial statements, that you can understand what is being presented. And it is kind of like, to know the rules, you must know the rules. And same, I mean, it's been 10 years since I've taken the CFA, but GAAP and IFRS treat different things differently, if my memory serves correctly. Yeah.
So I really, really think that our regulatory body, and Bill and I went to visit them last week, and they are intentionally moving slow. And honestly, I don't hate that for us, because our reputation is so fragile. And I know especially us, and especially in the digital space and in the private space, we want to move so quickly. We want the banks to keep up with us. We want the regulators to keep up with us. But at the same time, they are doing their very best. And hi, Seema, I love you. But I do think that role of taking it slow and making sure that they understand is crucial to every single person on this island. And I think that the new political regime, whatever that looks like, absolutely needs to take the reputation that we hold and have spent a lot of time rebuilding to be its #1 priority in the world.
Yeah, and I think the other point that I had, so being kind of part of the special economic zone, so we are actually in the process of getting SEMA license here, full SIP. And so to those that don't know, the zone itself has its own regulator. But this is just for kind of zone activities. There is a gap in legislation between the zone and that of SEMA. And so we have seen SEMA being comfortable and willing to register kind of SIB registered persons. So for those that aren't kind of in the securities business, that is more entities that are working on behalf of the group. So they might be investment advisors or managers, but for a group structure. And then you've got kind of the full SIB license, which is what you think of with Deriv, we're offering to retail clients. And whilst the ideal would be for us to have our licensed entity in the zone as well, this gap has led to discomfort from SEMA in their ability to oversee and regulate, because they don't have the latitude right now to directly oversee a SIB licensee if it is within the zone. And so we're actually having to split our kind of group on how we're structuring that. And so for the development and more business coming into the islands, I think the zone is a fantastic kind of sandbox and environment for, you know, bringing in new business and building, you know, sectors that weren't previously here. I think there's only about 17 broker-dealers on island, like across everything. Like full SIBs are not, in that regard, not that common. And so I would love to see kind of government looking at where the gaps and kind of things that are falling through the crack are, and just patching those over, because the only way that the zone can continue to grow and kind of build business and shore up the financial services sector and to grow would be to kind of identify these gaps that are currently there and kind of making sure we're closing those with legislation so that the regulator is comfortable to regulate these types of entities.
Thank you.
So we live in a world where protecting project information is very important. And I think you touched on it a little bit, but I just wanted to ask about implementing AI in the financial sector. How
What's the planning protecting those private information?
So, for private information, I think there's two different private information. So you've got like the company specific, and so for the implementation of AI, that would be most likely kind of ring-fenced AI models. So you're not sharing any proprietary information. With the use of AI, depending on how it's implemented, it may or may not impact kind of client data and PII. But our data protection framework is broad enough that as long as you're following the guidelines, I mean, if you're not, that's a whole other problem. But as long as you're kind of following the standards that we have in place for data protection, it shouldn't change too drastically, depending on the software. Say, for example, Scribe. If anybody knows kind of what Scribe is. So it records your screen, helps you create an internal processor. So that's something that we use internally. But that had to go through our security team, all of that. And it's going to be, if you're using third-party tools, what type of license are you getting from that, right? Only the enterprise version met our security requirements, and that's because it has an auto-redaction feature, right? And so it's ensuring that you are, to the extent you're not building it from the ground up in-house and you are using kind of third-party softwares, that you're following your standard procedure that you would if it is dealing with client data, if it's feeding any PII, that there are the controls and procedures in place to make sure that that isn't going to get leaked, and also that these third-party companies have the appropriate controls in place. It's not actually that huge a deviation from our current process. I think it sounds like it might be, but as long as you're following what you should be, then I don't think it's going to change too much. Yes?
Back off to answer this. We don't put any client data in the large language model.
Thank you. My question is, would you have any idea that you could share as to whether or not SEMA is thinking about or in process of appointing a crypto SAR, leader, to help Cayman, solidify Cayman's dominance in the offshore hard crypto? Because surely if we just let things drift along, Switzerland will assume that role. Do you think? Question.
So I don't think I necessarily have an answer to this one. No, I can't specifically speak to kind of what SEMA are looking to do. On a virtual asset side, they have very newly appointed a head of virtual assets. Whether the new head is going to kind of venture into kind of a broader space and kind of assume that role, who knows? I think, unfortunately, your guess is as good as mine, unless anybody else does.
I think a better approach is to have groups of people in the industry, which already has, you have Digital Cayman with these other, or the Blockchain Association. Like, odds are better if groups of really knowledgeable people present themselves as a support for SEMA than the other way around.